Guest is Dr. Dennis McKenna, and we are talking about drugs. We're talking about plants, and we're talking about drugs, and we're talking about the drug war, and we're talking about all kinds of strange things and interesting things. So I suggest you stay right where you are, because we have only just begun. Once again, here is Dr. Dennis McKenna. Dennis, welcome back.
Thank you.
I have a question for you that you cannot, you certainly don't have to answer. You can consider it, not answer it. I spoke with Dr. Timothy Leary before he passed away briefly, and had set up an interview, and of course there wasn't enough life left, and we never made it. Although he was very comfortable to the very end. He had a big cylinder next to him. It's a long story. Anyway, when I interviewed Terence, I asked Terence something that I had heard about Dr. Leary, and that was that out there somewhere, buried or secreted away in a place that might still be found, it is said, and has been said for years, there are 20,000 hits of Blue Sandos, LSD. And Terence chuckled a little and didn't exactly say he knew where they were, but he didn't say he didn't know where they were.
He didn't know where they were.
You don't think he knew?
Of course not.
Well,
I think that's an urban myth.
An urban legend? You really think so?
I do.
You don't think Timothy socked him away somewhere, huh?
Well, I don't know. Maybe he did.
Yeah, maybe he did, right. Okay.
I hope they're cold anyway, or they won't be much good.
Well, that's true, isn't it? All right, so urban legend. Okay. Somebody writes, and I've got this screen I can look at, this computer screen, and people can send what's called a fast blast and ask questions. Somebody writes and says, would you ask Dr. McKenna, please, if the spraying of defoliant in South America, which we are doing now due to the, the whole drug war thing, is affecting these plants in the areas that you talked about?
Well, yes. It's certainly, it's affecting everything in the areas that we're talking about. I actually, Dr. Mark Plotkin, who is an ethnobotanist that many of you may know about, he's very well known as the author of Tales of a Shaman's Apprentice, among other things, but he is working down there with his nonprofit group called the Amazon Conservation Team, and he has been doing quite a bit of work in southern Colombia and has seen firsthand the impact of this defoliation. It's not only, the problem is that it's very hard to target the defoliant only on the coca fields. It also drifts over the crops that these people depend on for their food and the villages where the people live. And anyone can go down there and see that, the impact is tremendous. Children with terrible skin diseases, and, it's definitely impacting those people. And it's outrageous. It basically amounts to international criminal behavior on the part of the United States, in my opinion. There's got to be a better way to deal with this problem than toxifying the environment. Again,
that's a war against the plants. It's not a war against the people that are extracting and purifying.
Well, yeah. It's a war. It's an attempt to exterminate the plants, which is in itself a bad idea. But the problem is it also impacts. These plants are growing where these people live, and they also grow their crops in the same or adjacent fields. So it gets in their food supply. It gets on the people themselves directly. This is just one of the consequences of this misguided policy.
All right, a little about DMT and drugs like it. I played a song just for fun, before you came on, Journey to the Center of the Mind. And at one part of that song it says, but be careful, referring to the journey, you might not come back. Now, with LSD, there were some people that essentially didn't come back. They and I've always wondered, and I'd like your opinion, do you think that these are people who were predisposed to psychological difficulties in the first place, or that the ingestion of whatever drug we're talking about here was the primary cause of extended difficulties?
I think that in most cases, the incidences of people who, quote unquote, don't come back are extremely low, for one thing. And I think that in most cases, you can say that there were previous psychological problems, and that the drugs, the LSD or whatever, was basically a catalyst, that they were at risk, of psychosis anyway.
The problem, of course, is that these are the very people on the street level that are most likely to do something like that.
Well, again, this comes back to the whole issue. Number one, psychedelics are not for everyone. And number two, you have to pay attention to set and setting. The context is so important because, again, in the shamanic context, in the use of ayahuasca, for example, in Peru, when yes, people do get into psychological difficulties. They can have panic reactions or anxiety. Many people often become convinced that they're either dying or that they are not going to come back. Mm-hmm. But the shaman, has a bag of tricks, essentially, and is able to apply some of those tricks simply, very simple things, such as singing one of these icaros, one of these magical songs, or blowing tobacco smoke over the person, or otherwise do things to calm them down and kind of get them back on a stable setting. That's why it's very important to, have a structured context, some sort of ritual context. And, generally, it helps if there's a person, in this case, the shaman, that people have confidence in, that they sort of feel that this person is watching over them, or this group of persons. That's one of the dangers with the with the drug tourism. Not all shaman are that experienced. Some you can't always trust, and so you sort of have to. It's better if you do this in a situation where you feel safe and you feel like the people that you're with, really are looking after you and not just there to take your money. And that's the thing. I think in the context of our society, if these psychedelics, which I really, you have to place them in a category apart from all of these other substances, which are more recreational, but the psychedelics are more of a spiritual or experiential thing. But I think if these things are ever going to be used, in our culture, we have to develop some kind of models, some kind of context. It may not be traditional shamanism. We can't really integrate that into our culture. No. But we can take some of the elements and combine it with elements of psychotherapy, for example.
Well, let's try this angle. Doctor, what would you say would be the psychological or metaphysical benefits or gains that a person might reasonably expect to take away from the experience?
Well, it's hard to say because the experience is as individual as the person, and a lot of it depends on what your expectations are. Again, getting back to this issue of intent. Mm-hmm. Some people may take it, and in the case of ayahuasca, it's generally emphasized that it's important to have an expectation, to express an intent. People may take it to have insights about their relationships, for example, or psychological problems, maybe depression or sleep difficulties, or even physical illnesses. People take ayahuasca, to have insights about their physical state of health. Other people may take it to solve problems, things that they're working on, intellectual things, or, it's taken for all these purposes.
So then it allows intense physical self-examination or intellectual self-examination?
It allows for both, yes, physical and intellectual self-examination. I think that ayahuasca is unique. It really, I mean, while the hallucinogens themselves stand apart from all of these other substances as unique, I think that ayahuasca is, again, unique among that group, because I think that there is much more to its activity than just the psychological experience. It's not that you take it, you have the experience, and that then it's over. It continues to work afterwards, more than other hallucinogens. There's a lot of processing, both mental and physical, that goes on subsequent to the experience.
Maybe you could comment on this for me. There are many scientists investigating near-death experiences. Very, very interesting things produced by near-death experiences, associations with white light, relatives that have passed away, examination of one's own life, flashing by you, that sort of thing. Is there a relationship of the pharmacology that occurs in the brain between any of these drugs and what might occur during a near-death experience, do you suppose?
Yes, I think there probably is. I think that these two territories interface with each other or share a common border. I mean, it is known, for example, that DMT and its close relative 5-methoxy-DMT are both neurochemicals. They both occur in the normal human brain. We're not sure what their functions are. People have suggested, my colleague Jace Calloway, a scientist in Finland, who has worked on these issues, suggests that maybe endogenous, that is internally occurring DMT, has to do with the modulation of dream states. And he's come up with a very plausible and testable theory that could show that maybe this is the physiological function of DMT. Other experiments have shown that in stress situations, in states of extreme stress, and I think we can put death in that category.
Yeah, absolutely.
The levels of DMT in your circulation, in your spinal fluid, for example, and presumably in your brain, are elevated markedly. So it's possible that in the dying state, the brain is actually programmed to turn these things out and modulate the experience, which is not to say that, it doesn't reduce it to a DMT experience. I think a DMT, is probably an element of the process of dying, and probably of the process of being born as well.
Wow. It was a better question than I thought it was. That's really interesting. So then one might...
Well, I believe one of your guests was Dr. Rick Strassman on your program recently, or was that another?
It may have been another host.
Oh, he is a researcher, a colleague of mine and others in this field, and he was one of the first researchers to do some FDA-approved research on DMT at the University of New Mexico a few years ago. He was using synthetic DMT, administering it by injection. But he has recently written a book on his research called DMT, the Spirit Molecule, and it's very interesting. He has some very interesting and provocative things to say in that book about the possible functions of DMT. For example, he suggests that at the 49th day of conception, which is in many traditions thought to be the moment that the soul enters the body,
right,
that the pineal gland, which is the primary source of these endogenous tryptamines, there is a spike in its synthesis of DMT.
Wow.
I'm not sure what the basis of his statement is, but I think people with an interest in DMT should pick this book up. It's quite interesting. I'm just in the middle of it.
Well, that's fascinating. On the 49th day, when some say the soul is inculcated, there is a definite a spike in the DMT, or the presence of DMT in the brain. Wow,
that's right.
Wow.
This is what he says. I haven't seen the paper for it, but this is what he says.
Oh, my. That really is very provocative.
So it's not unreasonable to expect that at death something similar may go on. Generally, in states of extreme stress or psychological stress, it's not unreasonable to think that may trigger the release of DMT, which is actually released into the circulation as much as in the brain. Besides the brain, the other organ in the body that synthesizes DMT is the adrenal glands, which are very much involved with the stress response.
All right. Again, a question that you are fully, you're just welcome to not answer it, but while you've certainly concentrated on the science side of all this, it's hard to believe that back through the 60s and through the trips to the Amazon and all the time you spent with Terence, that you would not have, that you stayed a pure academic, that you would not have experienced all of this. So can we get that out of the way?
Well, yes, I have, and I think that's clear to everybody that knows our work. Yes, I mean, I have approached it from a scientific standpoint, but you can't become a lens grinder or a telescope maker without occasionally looking through the telescope. I mean,
right.
This is the analogy.
So, was the experience for you? Would you describe it in as profound a manner as Terence did, or was it for you a different experience?
Which experience?
Well, DMT. We'll stick to DMT. Yeah, sure.
Well, yeah, it was pretty profound. I mean, it is one of the most reliably profound experiences in the smoked form, because it is so overwhelming. In the orally active forms, it's sometimes extremely profound and sometimes not so profound. And again, this, it sort of depends on the circumstances, and sometimes you get a leg up, and sometimes you don't. In these orally active forms. But generally, I think that the orally active forms are probably the way. If nature meant for man to take DMT, it probably should have been in an orally active form, potentiated by one of these MAO inhibitors.
Well, you know what? That's a really good question all by itself.
Compatible with physiology.
Doctor, that's a good question all by itself. Do you think that God, or nature, however you want to phrase it, intended for man to make use of these plants and substances as has been done? Do you think it was intended that way? After all, they are here.
Well, exactly. They are here. I'm a little uncomfortable with the idea that nature intended it. I think that, we are part of nature, and we have always had a relationship with plants. I mean, I think that is the context in which you have to understand, the use of all of these psychoactive plants. It's part of a much vaster web of interaction that we have with the plant kingdom. All of these herbal medicines that people are interested in, the whole interest in natural healing and medicinal plants and so on, is really an attempt, I think, on the part of an alienated, urbanized culture to get back to nature, to literally rediscover their roots. And the psychoactive plants, are within this context. But I don't think there's somebody. I don't think that there is somebody out there directing things. I mean, it's not like nature is conscious or God is telling us to take these plants. It's that in the process of evolving on this planet as part of the biosphere, we have co-evolved with these plants and with these substances.
On the other hand, there were the 10 Commandments, and he didn't tell us not to take them.
He didn't tell us.
No. Doctor, hold on. We're at the bottom of the hour. We'll be right back from the high desert. I'm Art Bell.